I used to think trust broke like a glass. One sound, one mess. Everybody knows what happened. In Atlanta, it breaks like humidity, slow, sticky. It gets into everything you own before you realize the air changed. I'm Marcus, 38, systems guy at a bank with a skyline view of Midtown and a badge that opens more doors than it should. My wife Jamie is an event coordinator who can make a ballroom look like a summer night and a parking deck look like a miracle. We met at a fundraiser off Peachtree, where I was there to keep the Wi-Fi from melting and she was there to keep donors from melting. We both did our jobs. Then we ended up splitting a chili dog at the Varsity like people in a commercial. Marriage grew in those small Atlanta places. Sunday walks on the Beltline, where somebody's Bluetooth speaker always knows the exact wrong song to play. Tuesday tacos in Decatur under a fan that squeaked like a bird, rainstorms that turned Howell Mill into a river and gave us an excuse to stay in bed. I could keep telling you the montage because that's what I do for a living. I keep things running smooth and pretend it just happens. But the montage lies. The real story is smaller and meaner. It's a phone turned face down. It's after-partner drinks that sound like networking but feel like a reroute. It's her keys breathing on the counter at 12,044 a.m. while I look at a blinking cursor on a bash script and wonder when the house started sounding like a stranger. The first times I asked where she'd been, I did it all wrong. You learn quick. In a server room or a marriage, that tone is a credential. I'd try for casual and land on cop. She'd give me the event world liturgy. We ran late. The loadout was chaos. The rental guy was slow and I can't leave the client alone with him. If I pushed, she'd stack the words. You don't understand how it works, Marcus. It's not 9 to 5. It's wherever the client is happy. I'd back off, because in my line of work, unhappy clients can end a quarter, and in hers, unhappy clients can end a reputation. And what's love for, if not giving the other person the benefit of the doubt until you run out of benefit? The day the air shifted had no headline. We were eating lunch at our place near Grant Park. Small kitchen, good light. And she scrolled her phone while I stirred a pot of red beans like it had answers. The screen flashed a message bright enough for a ghost. Still thinking about last night! You're bad for me! She tilted the phone away so fast, she knocked a spoon on the floor. You okay? I said, still stirring. She smiled, a smile I know from when she's calming a nervous CEO on a podium. Spilled salsa on my calendar, she said. It's fine. Salsa on a calendar. I married a woman who can invent a plausible emergency out of thin air and confetti. I washed the spoon, put the beans on low, kissed her temple, and told myself we were tired and due a vacation. We didn't take the vacation. The bank's core switch replacement slipped. She landed a run of summer corporate events that paid like respect and killed like a marathon. We lived in the same apartment like two people living in the same airport. Waves, borrowed chargers, texts that say, gate change. One night, I woke to her shower at 2007 a.m. I lay very still and thought, there are two kinds of water in this city, what falls and what you turn on. This felt like rain inside. Here's where I tell you about the version of me I didn't know I had until I needed him. In a breach, you can spend all night rummaging through logs like you're going to find one line that says, here is the betrayal. You won't. The best engineers I know are the ones who stop chasing noise and build a clean path out. So that's what I did with my marriage. I stopped interrogating and I started planning an exit that didn't burn the house down while I was still in it. It ran against every panic impulse I had. I wanted to shake her phone and demand the truth fall out like pennies. I wanted to follow her car and film the answer like a teenager. Instead, I made coffee, sat at our table, and wrote 3 lists in a notebook because paper doesn't leave a trail on anybody's cloud. The first list was what I know for sure. She's later than she says. She's hiding her screen. There are new charges on the joint card at places that don't sound like food or linens, mid-range boutique hotels that keep their lobby lighting low and their staff trained to call anyone a guest. The second list was what I won't do. I won't break the law. I won't hack her stuff. I won't recruit our friends. I won't put a camera in a place where a camera shouldn't go. The third list was my favorite. What enough looks like. Enough wasn't knowing every name or every room. Enough was having a timeline that a mediator could understand without a thesaurus and a lawyer could glance at without an aspirin. Enough was getting out with my dignity and our lives intact. I am not naive. To leave well, you need to know what you're walking on. So I opened a new tab, typed Georgia recording legal consent, and read statutes until my brain tasted like copier toner. Georgia is a one-party consent state. That means if I'm part of the conversation, I can record it without announcing I'm doing it. I'm not giving advice. I'm telling you the sentence my eyes stopped on at 2 in the morning that made my hands stop shaking. I ordered a micro recorder the size of a lighter and signed for the package on a Thursday like it contained socks. I also did something I'm not proud of, but I'm not sorry either. I bought a cheap prepaid phone from a store on Memorial Drive that sells cases decorated like dragons and angel wings, $40 of plastic and minutes. I loaded it with a number only 2 people would call, a coworker in security who owed me a favor, and my brother in Charlotte who would call anybody's bluff for sport. I didn't want to cheat. I didn't want to pretend. I wanted to stop being the only person in our house with nothing to hide. Jealousy is cheaper than a private investigator and more reliable than a hunch. If Jamie was going to tell me the truth, it would be because she was afraid of losing something, and for months that something had only been me in theory. Call it the burner alibi. I started working late. In banking IT, working late is like saying Atlanta in July is warm, tautology. I scheduled a fake maintenance window after hours, the kind you can justify to anyone because nobody wants to reboot a switch at noon. I left the burner phone in my gym bag, in my closet, on the bathroom counter while I shaved. It would buzz where it could be found, but never answered where I could be cornered. Ben from security would call, say nothing, hang up. My brother would text, "Tonight, man." Don't be soft. I named him Luke in the phone like it meant nothing. Jamie noticed within a day. New phone? She asked, towel wrapped, hair leaving damp hieroglyphs on the floor. Work line, I said, tapping the bank's logo on my polo like that made it true. We're dividing the on-call numbers. Cleaner. She walked past me, touched the phone with one finger like it might open a door if you pressed the right glyph, and said nothing. I could feel the weather change. It pricked the skin. She started asking me the questions I'd stopped asking her. Who is it? Where are you going? Will you be late? Every time, I answered like a man whose life could be audited. I told her places I truly was, Midtown office, the cold room on 3, the build lab near North Yards, because lies are heavy. The only thing I let her carry was the possibility that if she kept disappearing, she might return to a house that had learned to live without her. You might think this game made me feel powerful. It did not. It made me feel like a person playing chess with a cat. You move pieces. The cat knocks them off the board and stares at you like you invented gravity. But I could see what I needed to see. Her networking grew sloppy around my new silence. She'd get home, smell like hotel lobby fig and someone else's cologne, and ask in the same breath if I'd eaten and where I'd been. I'd say the office and let her drown in how boring a truth can be. The recorder lived in my pocket for 2 weeks before it ever met air. I tried bringing it out once at a bar in Inman Park, but the conversation that night performed normalcy. She told a story about a florist who forgot peonies and had to swap to ranunculus like a crisis. The device felt stupid and hot against my leg. I went home angry at myself for becoming a man who carried a machine like a prayer. The confession came on a night that didn't want one. We'd had decent hours for once. She made a pot roast like her mother's, less salt, more rosemary, and we sat at the little table that had held so many apologetic takeout bags lately. The burner phone buzzed on the microwave, and she stared at it like it was an insect that had landed on her plate. She clicked her tongue in a way I hate and love. "Answer it," she said, too calm. "It's work," I said. "Answer it," she repeated, and I understood the dare. I let it go to voicemail. The anger in her face was not theatrical. It was small and modern and mean. "How long has she been calling you?" she asked. "She?" I said. She smiled the kind of smile a person uses when they've convinced themselves that forcing pain will hurt less than receiving it. "Don't make me say the word. Who is she, Marcus?" The recorder was under the table, thumb sliding a switch as casual as flipping a coaster. One-party consent, my brain repeated like a metronome under thunder. "There's no she," I said. "There's a coworker and my brother who thinks I need a hobby that isn't bash scripts." "You're the stable one," she said, firing a title at me like it would stick. "You're the rock. You're the guy who judges all of us who live on adrenaline." "I don't judge," I said. "I just don't mistake chaos for charisma." She stood so fast her chair skittered on the tile. "I have been in banquet halls with $100,000 of promises on the line, and you think I'm the one who loves chaos? You think I like waiting on a rental truck that's 45 minutes late because somebody went to the wrong loading dock? You think I enjoy watching men in suits talk to my chest about budgets? Her voice landed hard on budgets, and something familiar in me bent in the middle. Then come home earlier, I said carefully, or tell me you can't, but don't rewrite basic math and call it a novel. You're cheating, she said, like it was the only line she'd practiced. You're cheating, and you want me to bless it because it's tidy. You're projecting, I said, and it's possible that's the most unhelpful sentence I've ever said. She laughed once, a sound with edges. Fine, she said. You want tidy? Here's tidy. There's a guy. He works with a caterer we use. He says the right things. He doesn't make me feel like a scheduling error. How long? I heard myself ask, voice not my own, and realized I'd made the mistake. I promised myself I wouldn't. I'd put my heart in the witness box. Since Mother's Day, she said. The Piedmont Park Gala. You left early because your database windows were tight, and I didn't want to sit in my dress alone in our apartment listening to you breathe like servers. She flinched at her own sentence, maybe because she heard how it made a machine the villain and not the choices. I switched the recorder off with a click. I hoped the innocence of the room would swallow. What's his name? I said, flat. Reed, she said after too long. He's nobody. It's nothing. Nobody is a kind of person. I have the emails in my head to prove it. What's nothing look like? I asked. Drinks after loadout, she said quickly, like if she said it fast enough it would become less true. A hotel when we were too tired to drive. That's it, it's not? She stopped before the word love got ideas. I thought about standing. I thought about sweeping the roast into the trash like a gesture could clean a table. Instead, I sat, because my body remembered things my mind didn't. The way she tucks her hair in when a thunderstorm starts, the way she says my name when she's looking for a cell phone charger. The recorder was a small weight in my pocket. I wasn't going to use it as a weapon. I was going to use it like a locksmith uses a pick, quiet, precise, designed to open what's already built. Okay, I said, and she blinked because people in fights don't expect okay. What does okay mean? She asked, suspicious. It means we're done trying to make a house out of weather, I said. Tomorrow I'll call a lawyer. I'll ask about mediation. I'll send you the number because we should do this like adults who built a life and are now disassembling it. I won't drag Reed into it unless his mess leaks into ours. I won't post anything. I won't tell anyone what you told me tonight, but I'm not going to unknow it and pretend it was wind. You're leaving, she said, as if saying the word could stop it. I'm exiting, I said, because leaving feels like an accident and exiting feels like a decision. I'm not angry. I'm not bargaining. I am a systems guy, Jamie. I keep things running. When they break and it's not fixable without destroying the thing itself, my job becomes simple. Shut it down clean. She cried. Not the open crying that clears a room, but the quiet leak of a person who realizes the performance is over and the crew is already striking the set. I don't want to be the villain, she whispered. I don't want a villain, I said, and it was true. I want my life back. That night we were polite. Polite is a mercy after the big sentences. She took the couch without asking. I lay in our bed and counted the ceiling fan blades like they owed me money. At 4, I woke and walked to the balcony. Atlanta does a thing before dawn where it smells like wet concrete and bread. I stood there and felt relieved and awful and 20 other words that don't belong on a t-shirt. The next morning, I did something that would have looked petty if I didn't work where I work. I downloaded 3 months of joint credit card statements and put them in a folder named taxes, because labels that sound boring keep strangers out. I didn't rifle her purse. I didn't scroll her phone. I compared charges to the calendar. Hotels with names that make people feel cougar young. Rideshare receipts that slip between midnight and Monday. Bar tabs that match venues I didn't attend. I made a simple timeline that said nothing except, here is a pattern you can draw without crayons. When the bank opened, I walked 2 blocks past it into a brick building with a law office that smelled like coffee and paper. The receptionist asked if I had an appointment, and I said I needed advice, not a war. She smiled like she'd heard both requests and only liked one of them. I met a woman named Ava who wore glasses like instruments and spoke like a physician. She asked me to tell her the facts, and every time I strayed into feeling she waited me out with a pen poised in a way that made me get better. When I mentioned the recording, she nodded once. George's one party, she said. If you were a party, you're fine. Use it sparingly, not vindictively. I don't want to burn her, I said. I want out, quietly. Good, she said. Mediation can work if both parties want to stop bleeding. It's about money and shelter. We don't need to exhume your heart to divide a couch. She gave me a handout printed on cheap paper titled Mediation Basics, and I loved her for the bargain of it. Gather joint financials, she said. Pay stubs, car titles, lease agreements. If there's a retirement account, bring statements. Stick to what's shared. If she starts to perform, the mediator will steer her toward outcomes. That's their job. What about this Reed? I said, making his name a tool. Legally, he's a shadow, Ava said. Unless he wrote checks from your account or ducked into your home to do harm, he matters emotionally. He's irrelevant financially unless you decide to make him relevant, which I would advise against if peace is your aim. Peace is a rubber word. People stretch it to cover anything. I meant something small, no police, no public spectacle, no Facebook cousin comment chains. The recorder stayed in my pocket like a forgotten coin. I walked home with a manila folder under my arm that felt like it contained my life and a plan that didn't. I texted Jamie before I got to the elevator. I told her I'd found the mediator who could see us Friday afternoon. I included an address and a time and the phrase low conflict because if you say it enough, sometimes men who were boys in a loud house believe it into the room. She replied with a single word that made me believe she was still the person who taught me that flowers at a grocery store are fine if you take them out of the plastic and cut the stems, okay? That evening she made pasta and we ate like people in a truce. Twice her phone buzzed with that bright light of private life, and twice she flipped it face down like we were still making an agreement about dignity. I was clearing plates when she asked, "Are you going to tell my mother?" "No," I said. "Linda loves you, not me." "She loves you too," Jamie said softly, and that made me have to sit. I pictured Linda at her kitchen table in Sandy Springs, sorting pills into a weekly box, trusting us to be what her church friends say we are. I've seen honest women carry lies other people handed them like casseroles they didn't ask for. I wasn't going to hand her one. The night before the mediation, I did something that felt like inventory. I folded clothes into duffel bags like I was packing for a trip that had no return date and no airline points. I set aside the few things that were mine alone: tools, 2 ridiculous concert shirts, the watch my father gave me the first time I paid a bill late. I left the rest where it lived. I didn't write a note because I was done making the house feel like a theater. I lay down and stared at a ceiling that had held us both and felt the city hum like servers and thought, this is the last night I sleep in this life. Before dawn, I laced my shoes and ran the belt line like a pen scraping a line through a map. A man with a bulldog nodded at me like, that's what men do when the sun hasn't decided and your heart is loud. When I got back, Jamie was awake, hair up, holding a mug like a white flag. We didn't talk about the afternoon. We talked about trash day and the weather and the way the Braves always make you a believer before they make you an apostate. I showered and put on a clean shirt and slid the recorder into my pocket out of habit, not hunger. At noon, the burner phone, my ugly little theater prop, buzzed again. I looked at it and felt only tired. I powered it down and dropped it in a drawer. If jealousy was the hook that pulled the confession to the surface, I didn't need the hook anymore. The fish was on the deck. We'd do this now without games. If there was any mercy left to give each other, it lived in that decision. That afternoon, I stood in a mediator's office that smelled like citrus cleaner and paper clips, holding a folder that said who I'd been for 7 years. Jamie arrived 5 minutes after me wearing the navy dress she saved for meetings where someone important needed convincing. She looked at me like a stranger you respect on a bus. The mediator was a woman with kind hair and a desk free of pictures. Either she was private or she had learned to keep people from mistaking her life for a part of the service. She asked us to say what we wanted in sentences that used verbs. I said, I want to end our marriage without public harm. Jamie said, I want to keep my car and stay in the apartment until year end. The mediator nodded like both were reasonable outcomes, and I felt a relief so sharp it startled me. I didn't pull out the recorder. I didn't reference the timeline or read or hotels with dim lobbies. The mediator slid yellow pads across the desk, drew 3 columns, assets, liabilities, agreements, and the air in the room changed from storm to spreadsheet. I am good in spreadsheet air. Even heartbroken, I can breathe there. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The real ending belongs to another day. This is just the middle, where a man stops chasing noise, a woman runs out of stories that hurt less than the truth, and the city around them keeps being itself, indifferent and gorgeous and humid enough to make your shirt cling. If you've lived in a house where silence grew teeth, you know exactly how it felt to sit in that chair, sign my name twice, and feel my hand come back with a weight missing and a weight added at the same time. The mediator had us start with things that don't look like marriage on paper: lease dates, renewal clauses, who signed first, security deposit math. "We'll move to the heavier items after we finish the easy ones," she said, and the way she said easy was kind. We agreed to extend the current lease through year end, with Jamie remaining in the apartment and covering utilities in exchange for me covering the remainder of the lease penalty when she moved out. I didn't flinch. I wanted clean endings more than I wanted to win a bill. The car came next. Mine was the boring sedan you get when you work in infrastructure and do your own oil changes on Saturdays because peace can look like a torque wrench. Hers was newer, leased through the event company's stipend with a buyout option next spring. She kept hers, I kept mine. The mediator wrote it like a grocery list and asked us to initial. On assets, we were not complicated people. A joint savings with a number that looked good in daylight and smaller at 3 a.m. because money is a mirror. 2 retirement accounts, in my name and a small one in hers that mostly held her 20s in a target date fund. A couch, a bed, a kitchen that always wanted to be more than it was. The mediator kept drawing boxes and arrows. "If we agree to exchange values instead of items," she said, "we avoid the ritual of measuring who gets the coffee table." I agreed to a cash offset so she could keep most of the furniture and I could go find a studio that didn't require me to eat from a box on the floor. "Debts," the mediator said with that soft administrative cruelty of adulthood. "A small balance on a credit card that wouldn't have existed if we hadn't believed in doing holidays the way the internet teaches you. A lingering personal loan we took when my mom got sick and flights weren't cheap and time wasn't kind. We split them by who could carry which without wobbling." The mediator kept her pen where it always was, between agreement and argument like a crossing guard. She paused, then said, "Ground rules, social media, no posts, no subtweets, no confetti cannons of half-truths. A non-disparagement clause protects both of you," she said, and the way she looked at Jamie was only a little longer than the way she looked at me. We both initialed. I felt something unclench in my chest I didn't even know had teeth. On the way out, I held the door for Jamie, and she said thank you with the voice you save for people you used to know. In the hallway, she reached for my sleeve like the ground was tilting. "I don't know how to do Thanksgiving," she said. "Me either," I said, and I meant it in a way that didn't reach backward. We got on separate elevators. Mine smelled like lemon cleaner and old plans. The next day, I found a studio in Old Fourth Ward over a coffee shop that thinks foam art is religion. It had brick, a window shaped like a promise, and a sound like trains at night. I signed a 6-month lease and bought a mattress that arrived in a box, swelled into something that could carry a man, and smelled like new. I stood in that room with 4 walls and no history and felt the strange mercy of emptiness. You can't haunt a place you just met. Moving out was not a montage. It was cardboard and the careful theft of a skillet you seasoned with your life. It was leaving the framed picture from the first year on purpose, not because I wanted to pretend we still were, but because I refused to turn memories into trophies. Jamie wasn't home when I left the keys on the counter. I didn't leave a note. The apartment could say goodbye to itself. The burner phone lived in a drawer like a bad idea you tell yourself you might need again. I plugged it in one last time, scrolled through the performance, and found it boring now that I'd stopped needing the shape of suspense to move blood. I powered it down and put it in the back of a kitchen drawer in the new place with the rubber bands and the IKEA hex keys and the spare batteries that work until they don't. I'd recycle it later. For now, it could sit where props go when the play closes. Day 1 alone, I woke before the sun like my body was a job site. I ran the belt line because it was a line and I needed geometry, not poetry. My lungs complained. My legs made old promises they would keep if I kept showing up. I ate eggs. I oversalted because Jamie used to tease me about cooking like a bachelor, and it turned out the joke was a blueprint. I made coffee in a French press that survived 3 apartments. I opened the blinds and let Atlanta into the room like a friend who doesn't ask for anything but your time. Around noon, my phone lit with a text from Jamie. "Can we talk tonight?" The part of me that wants to repair anything with a command line twitched. I typed, "We can talk about logistics." She replied, "Not logistics, feelings." I watched the dots stop and start twice and felt nothing noble about my own stillness. I typed, "Mediation covers the rest. I'll answer questions about the agreement." She sent back one word that hurt because it was small and childish and true. "Fine." My lawyer, Ava, emailed a draft separation agreement with yellow highlights in the margins. She liked bullet points and I felt seen. I took my time reading because haste is how you make enemies with yourself later. The recording from that night sat on my desk like a coin. I considered sending it to Ava. I didn't. My goal was not to win a trial I wasn't in, it was to file, sign, and walk into a life that didn't require exhibits. The next mediation session was shorter. The mediator slid the draft across the table, asked if we'd reviewed. We had. There were small changes, one date, one transfer amount, a clause about the security deposit that made me feel like an adult. Then the mediator did the thing she'd avoided. "We need to formalize the boundary language," she said, and looked at both of us. "Communications remain respectful, no contact at work events except for practical matters. No entry into the other party's dwelling without written permission." She said it like a recipe, and I wrote my initials like a man who can cook. Afterward, in the parking lot, the heat hit me in the face like an old memory of practice fields and Gatorade. Jamie walked toward her car, then turned around and came back with that look people get when they're about to say the real thing or a thing that thinks it's real. "I didn't want it to be him," she said. "It happened fast, and then it wasn't fast, and I kept telling myself it would stay small if I kept it blurry." I stared at the sidewalk because eye contact in parking lots has started wars. "It got clear," I said. "It got loud," she said. "Everything got loud in my head." "I can't fix your volume," I said gently. "I can only turn mine down." She nodded like I'd offered her water and she was reminding herself how to drink it. She touched my arm once, a muscle memory, then left. I sat in my car and let the air conditioning try to make the day behave. Weeks turned into a calendar you could trust. I learned where the good light was in the studio and how to hang a towel so it dried without smelling like a locker room. I chose a mode to be the one. I called my mother on Sundays and told her the polite version. She said she loved me with the kind of love that makes a room feel like a porch. I went to the bank and rerouted direct deposit and sat with HR in a small room where the carpet made saying the word beneficiary feel like a violation. I said it anyway. I wasn't brave, I was thorough. On a Tuesday, I had my first night in a men's group I'd found through a coworker who only told me about it because I made the mistake of being honest in the break room and admitting I needed a place where nobody expected me to be funny. We sat in a circle in a church basement that smelled like coffee and crayons, and a guy named Victor talked about how he kept thinking he could audit his way to peace. I didn't share that night. I listened. I learned the difference between privacy and hiding. There was one last snag because endings like to test your conviction. Jamie texted me 2 nights before the final filing. "Can we meet? Not about the agreement. I need to say I'm sorry for real." I stared at the name on the screen and wondered whether compassion was just another way to sign a receipt you don't owe. I chose a public place, a coffee shop near Ponce where the baristas are loud enough to keep feelings honest. She arrived in a denim jacket I've watched survive 5 summers. She looked younger and older at once. We ordered, sat near the window where the city could chaperone. She started to speak and stopped and started again. "I wanted you to yell at me," she said finally. "I wanted a fight that made me the victim because I'm good at patching people up after they break their own plates." "I don't yell at servers," I said. "I unplug them." She laughed, then cried, because the joke took its time circling and found its target. "I'm sorry," she said, and I believed her. Not because the word is magic, but because her shoulders dropped and the tendons in her hands softened, and that's how truth looks when it's tired. I kept waiting for the truth to change by itself. "It won't," I said. "Neither will this paperwork." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to come back. I'm not asking for anything. I just didn't want the last thing you heard from me to be logistics." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it the way you mean it when someone returns a book they borrowed for too long and sets it down open to a page you underlined. We finished our coffee, we walked out. On the sidewalk, she reached for me and stopped herself, and I loved her a little for that. The courthouse day was anticlimax. Papers filed, names printed wrong by a clerk who sees 100 lives a day. We stood near the elevator and looked at each other like two people whose flight just got delayed and know the airline doesn't care. We didn't hug. I think that's the part of the story people expect. I'm not giving it to them. We nodded. The doors opened. We left. After, I took the long way back to the office along Piedmont. A storm was reading the city its rights. The trees did that pre-rain hush. I sat on a bench and watched a kid in a Spider-Man shirt feed ducks and thought about the complicated arithmetic of enough. I could list what I didn't know, hotels and dates, and the moment his hand touched the small of her back and the first lie she told herself that made the second easier. I could list what I did know, a timeline. A recording that never left my pocket, a paper trail that ends in a signature, a room that smells like coffee and new paint where I go to sleep alone and wake up without a story to maintain. The first Friday night alone, I didn't go anywhere dramatic. I went to the laundromat because clean shirts are proof of life. A woman folded towels like she was dealing cards, and a man read a paperback like it was an antique. I breathed. I texted my brother that I'd taken the burner to an electronics recycling bin and sent him a photo because sometimes proof is a gift. He replied, "Proud of you." Then added a GIF because brothers don't let you have clarity without a little noise. Work stayed work. I told my boss the truth in fewer nouns than it wanted, adjusted my on-call rotations, and wrote cleaner documentation because I had learned what happens when you don't write down how to leave something. I started hitting the gym in the building at 7, the time of day when the only other people there are sincere. I ate better. Not because I was better, but because my body had become a place I wanted to keep all the lights on in. Jamie's last text came a month later, a photo of the apartment half-packed, the art taken down so the walls looked older. "Moving day tomorrow," she wrote. "Thank you for being decent." I typed, "I hope your next place spits the version of you like best." She replied with a blue heart, and I let it disappear into the scroll the way you let a boat move downriver after you untie the rope. I kept the recording in a folder named Insurance for exactly 6 months. On a Sunday morning that felt like an ordinary victory, I opened it, listened to 30 seconds to confirm my memory was still a good witness, and then dragged it to the trash. I emptied the trash and sat there waiting for remorse or relief to show up like weather. Relief came. Later, remorse called to say it was stuck in traffic and might not make it. Some nights I still feel the outline of the old life, like a wallet in a jacket you don't wear anymore. But the more I practiced not looking at her social media, the easier it got to forget that I once believed I owed myself their highlight reel. I don't watch Reed either. He remains nobody, which is to say, he remains what he always was to me, a detail that doesn't change the equation. I chose to stop being a detective. I chose to be an engineer about my own heart. Do I miss her? Yes, and also, no, the way you miss the idea of a street you loved before it got popular. Sometimes I walk past a venue she worked at and feel a tug that isn't grief so much as muscle memory. Sometimes I see a couple at dinner and imagine their timelines like an analyst, and then I stop because I refuse to give the fear my good hours. I know enough now to know enough. I keep a small list taped inside my cupboard door where nobody can see it. It's not performative. It's not a TED Talk. It says, run early, eat outside when it's not too hot, call mom on Sunday, don't audit people you love, build exits you can walk through with your head up. The last line says, don't confuse knowing everything with being safe. If I had to teach a server anything, it would be that. There was a moment in Old Fourth Ward, 3 months after everything finalized, when I realized I'd stopped checking my phone every time it buzzed like it was a grenade or a rescue rope. It buzzed. I let it. It was a notification from my bank about a deposit, and I swiped it away and laughed out loud like a lunatic in a hallway because peace announces itself with boring alerts and coffee stains and a shirt you forgot you loved fitting better than it did last year. I made eggs. I burned the first batch. I tried again. That's life now. Try, burn, try. Don't hide devices. Don't trap a person because you're scared to be alone with your own weather. On an October Saturday, I took a long drive north, no destination, just the kind of drive where you count Waffle Houses and measure distance by when your podcasts run out. I pulled over at a roadside stand selling apples and honey. The woman behind the table told me which ones were good for baking and which ones were honest about being sweet. I bought a bag and put it in the passenger seat and felt, unexpectedly, like someone who had made a choice and then kept making it until it was a life. I don't have a dramatic epiphany to sell you. I have paper. I have a mattress that remembers the shape of a man who doesn't talk to himself in cross-examinations. I have a city that still smells like rain and bread and ambition. I have a quiet apartment over a coffee shop that plays records on Sunday mornings and makes the building feel like a movie you would watch even if nobody else had heard of it. I have friends who invite me over and don't ask me to explain the parts of the story that don't make them look noble. I have a group on Tuesday nights where a guy named Victor said last week that sometimes exit is the most faithful thing you can do for a thing you loved and outgrew, and I wrote it down because that sort of sentence is a tool. Mostly, I have enough. It's not a big word, it doesn't look good in neon, but it is a foundation. If you are where I was, in a kitchen with beans on the stove and a phone lit up like a siren and a spoon on the floor, here's what I can tell you that isn't advice but won't stop sounding like it. You don't have to know the name of every room to leave a house that is on fire. You only have to know where the door is and what you won't carry out with you. I left the surveillance. I left the fantasy of the perfect explanation. I left the idea that love is safe when you hold it tighter. I took my keys, I took my breath, I took the long way home. What would you have done in my place? Keep digging until you knew every detail, or exit when you had enough to leave clean. Would you have used the recording or deleted it sooner? Tell me in the comments. And if you're into real, messy, grown-up stories like this, hit like and subscribe so I know to keep going.